Okay, welcome. While everybody starts arriving into the room, I will make a few opening announcements. So my name is Linda Witt. I'm the president of the Fédération des Alliances Françaises, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and you'll be seeing Melissa Sara on the screen shortly as well. She's our National Programs Administrator, and she is based in Washington, D.C. She's managing all the technology for today's event, and we're very glad to have her. You are in the right place if you are expecting the discussion with the authors of The Heart of an Artichoke. And we want to tell you just a little bit about the Alliance Française network. We know that most of you in the audience today are already Alliance Française members, but for the handful of you that may not be members, we just want to remind you that our network here in the United States is the largest Alliance Française network in the entire world. And we serve about 25,000 learners of French each year. And I know that often it's a discussion, well, who can afford French classes? But I'd like you to know, if you don't already, that our cost per instruction hour in a small group class at the Alliance Française can be as little as $15 an hour. And of course, many of us enjoy the convenience of online classes with our native fluent instructors. So if you haven't looked into the Alliance Française already, please consider us part of your partnership in learning. We also want to tell you about a few events that are coming up that are free, like this one today. These are from our national events listing. In July, we have a fabulous duo who will be talking to us about jazz in Paris. And these guys are great. They regularly do presentations for the Smithsonian. And then also in July, we have a French comedian who's actually based in Florida, and he'll be discussing his new novel. And that'll be an interesting mix, I think, of English and French, that presentation. And then in July 30th, we have our blockbuster event with Adrienne Leeds of House Hunters International. She'll be coming on and telling us all about what it's like to live and invest in France. And then Melissa's got Chef Alain Lenôtre lined up, who she has worked with on 4 or 5 different occasions now. He'll be telling us how to make lava cake, including the recipe. And I have no idea what lava cake is, but I'm looking forward to finding out. And then finally, looking even a little further out in October, we're going to have Sandra Smith come back. She's a wonderful translator, and she'll be telling us more about what it's like to be translating Nemirovsky's work. So you can find information about all those events. They're all free to Alliance Française members on afusa.org, and we'll be adding other events as well. Want to tell you a little bit about the logistics of today's event. We want to encourage everybody to stay on mute during the presentation. You'll want to stay on speaker view so that you can see the slides, and then, depending on your settings, also the speaker, usually to the side of the slides. Please do put your questions and comments in the chat. Melissa will be taking a look at those, and we'll come back to some of them at the end of the presentation. Zoom is pretty dependable, but if you do have technical issues, then just try to sign back in after a few minutes and using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channel. I think you all know that. We'll send you the link afterward. And then our total runtime today will be, we expect, about an hour. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our 2 presenters. We'll start with Claire Lerognon. She is, for the past 20 years, or perhaps even over the past 20 years, she's been a language and communication specialist with the United Nations in New York. She's taught French to everybody from preschoolers to diplomats and UN's global staff. We're pleased to know and to report that she also taught for the Alliance Française in New York. And that, part of her mission is fostering multilingualism, which we think is super cool. And Claire is a native French speaker. She is originally from the Alsace region. In addition to being bilingual in English and French, she also has Lerognon. She has the basics of German and some Arabic down. So welcome very much to Claire. And now we'll move to our second introduction. Linda Phillips Ashour is the author of several novels, and then she also does articles, reviews, short fiction in other publications. She has been a teacher as well at UCLA Extension. She lived in the south of France for 9 years. So she has what many of us envy as, the ultimate immersion experience. But that was a long time ago. And a lot of what we'll be hearing about today is how she's, recapturing some of the language. And then she's a absolute lifelong learner of French. And we're also pleased to report a longtime member of the Alliance Française of Los Angeles. So welcome to both of you. I want to just make a couple of other introductory comments, and then we'll dive right in with the authors. I have had the great pleasure to read this delightful book that's the subject of today's event. The book is, I found, to be a very lively, very insightful discussion between the determined student of French in the form of Linda, and then the French teacher, who is Claire. So I think a lot of us in the audience today will be able to identify with Linda, since many of us are very passionate about French, and we would all like to make some, personal headway in learning or mastering the langue of la langue de Molière. Pardon. So the book was just released last month. It is available on Amazon, IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, and other independent bookstores, a very reasonable price. You'll find it on all of those platforms online. And then now, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in with the questions, which will reveal some kernels of wisdom for you to take away today, in addition, of course, to the ones that you will learn when you read the book. So we're going to go through about 10 questions here. And note that Melissa, for those of you in the audience, she will be putting info and links in the chat for you as we go along. So pay attention to those and copy them off to other sources if you find them useful. And then, by the way, we're saving a couple of the most important questions and audience Q&A for the end. So that's a special incentive to hang on with us. All right, let's get going. Linda and Claire, let's go ahead and start at the beginning. How did you come up with the idea for the very unique title of the book? And could you tell us a little bit about the process of creating it?
I'll jump in. Thank you for that warm invitation, Linda. That sounds, what author could wish for more? Thank you very much. The title, all right. I'm going to back up to the very, very beginning, how I met Claire. I had moved to New York in 2000, and I made a new friend who learned that I had lived in France for a few years. And she very quickly came up with an idea for a book group, and she brought the group together, and we began meeting monthly, and this continued for a decade. So I've known Claire for almost as long as I lived in New York. We would talk about books, we would talk about grammar, about many things over lunch, of course, that was essential, and we had lovely lunches. And then we met for our hour slid into several hours, and Claire and I would take the subway home, and we would talk about things, points of grammar, things that interested us. They spilled over into conversations that became a book, largely through the general persuasion of my husband, who overheard some of these conversations. And he said, you all have a book, you've got to get to work on it. And he started flogging us in the nicest way. So we had a draft, and then we had several drafts, but we had no title. So one night I was frantically making baby artichokes, and they're tricky. I don't think they're easy to make, but I was cutting and cutting, and I wanted a break. People were coming, dinner wasn't ready. Could be a disaster. So of course I tuned off and tuned into France. I found our maxim for this book, which is cœur d'artichaut, une feuille pour tout le monde. So a leaf for everyone. It seemed to fit. Claire was in agreement, and therefore that's the title. Claire, do you have things to add?
Yes, Linda, thank you. I was in agreement. I actually was. I am today. I absolutely love this title, and I'm very grateful to you for having had such a brilliant idea. But it took some convincing, because when I first heard Cœur d'Artichaut, of course, I thought about what it meant in French, fickle heart, and the idea of having, the idea of someone being often disillusioned about love, rejected, even associated with learning, was kind of not something that I had envisioned, anticipated. But so it took a little while to get to very much enjoy this title. And now I think that the artichoke itself very much embodies the idea of learning, because there is, sometimes with coarse artichokes, they have those prickly leaves, and you can prick your fingers on those leaves. But eventually, after taking one after the other, you are led to this very generous, melting, tender heart, which is the reward for learning. So I think it's a very lovely image for learning. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, I love that. So, following what Linda said, lots of leaves, lots of ways to learn. And then what Claire said, language is like a prickly path leading to the soft heart. That's very clever, very clever. Congratulations on that. And our next question, I have to tell you that one of my favorite parts of the book was the sidebars. And they contain personal anecdotes, recommendations, cultural and literary snippets, lots of fascinating information. And Melissa has just put up a sample of the sidebars on the screen here. And the first one on the left is a tip about memorizing an adjective along with nouns so that you can easily remember their gender, like l'eau est bonne. And then the other sidebar is a cultural tip about how the word dépanneur has a very different meaning in Montreal than it has elsewhere in the world. So could you tell us about how these sidebars came about as part of the design process of the book?
I'll jump in again. I'm a great interrupter, especially when I get excited / animated, carried away. And Claire, to her tribute, has dealt with this for such a long time. The sidebars represent anecdotes, all sorts of things. It's a real soup full of good things. But they also reflected our conversations, and they're true to how we operated and how we went back and forth. And visually, they're a pleasure. I'm sorry, Claire can speak to this. We have a delightful designer who is my husband's sister, and she sort of took our way of speaking and a way of writing this book and went to town with it, I think, in that visual way that you referenced. Claire, what more do you have to say? We love our sidebars.
We do, and I think that I actually would be interested as a reader to be presented with such a book, because it provides different entry points into the reading. You can either choose to follow our conversation that unfolds from chapter to chapter, and decide to interrupt it, peeking into those sidebars, or not. You can decide to leave the sidebars on the side and read them afterwards, or not. Or you can even decide to not dive into the dialogue à deux with us and simply focus on the sidebars and take them from any kind of chapters. So it's a very it's a flexible way of entering a book, and I like that idea very much. I think it's perhaps something that's novel about books. I don't know if you know about other books, designed this way, but I don't.
Well, for me as the reader, I can tell you that it worked brilliantly, because sometimes in the book, if things got really deep and I needed a break, then I would go for the sidebar, usually for a little bit of levity. So I just really have to compliment you guys on those sidebars. I was thrilled in the sidebars that I learned about, I had never heard of Bernard Pivot. I had never heard of the Instagram personality Magali Bertin, who is charming. And I'd just been to Montreal, so like I said, I was tickled to see the sidebar about the dépanneur. I also loved the film recommendations that you made in the sidebars, and I've set several of them aside to watch or for the first time or to rewatch. Les Saveurs du Palais and Les Femmes du Sixième Étage were two that you spent a lot of time on, and I really, really enjoyed seeing those suggestions. So let's move on to our next question. This one's for Linda specifically. On page 34, you talked about how you have learned, actually in an unusual fashion, you've enjoyed quizzing a native speaker, often Claire, of course, about the mistakes that you make on the fly. So, you know, basically quizzing them for clarification in the moment. And can you tell us a little bit more about that practice and why it was important for you?
It sort of continues to be, although that's changed. I'm in Los Angeles and I'm not in as much contact with native speakers, obviously, as I was back in the day. French people are very receptive to talking about language, I found. Has to be in the proper context. You can't, as I have a tendency to do, interrupt people just because I'm an American interested in French. That only goes so far. But I find that French people who love the language will stop and actually say, well, this usage, you know, it's like this for me, or no, that wasn't correct and this is why. So there are these fleeting moments of both discovery and instruction, which I just love. And it's nourishment. It really is. It have to find the right audience though. Don't interrupt. Don't be rude, which is a whole different discussion. Claire,
Yeah.
Claire, I've worn her down over the years. Poor thing. She is my dear friend and my continual instructor. So, other thoughts?
Claire, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I don't. Except that I no longer, I know how much Linda would love for me to sometimes correct her errors. I think they're very few, but I no longer do that. And I think it's actually helpful. You know, it's helping her to just take it easy.
That's a really good point, Claire. And I think the teachers in the audience would agree with you that there's a careful balance between overcorrection and too little correction. So that's a really good point. And Linda, I love the fact that, you know, since you are asking for corrections in context, it's very immediate. I mean, it's a very immediate and practical use of the language. You're doing everything in context, and that's a great learning moment. So it's quite brilliant of you to pursue that as a strategy. Okay, we'll move on to our next question. And if the audience hasn't figured this out already, you know, I'll share it with you. You are both so very comfortable in English and French that even though the book is written in English, you sprinkle in French words appropriate to the context during the dialogue. And I just found this to be a wonderful learning experience for myself as the reader, because I can tell you that I did not know a lot of the French words that you were sprinkling into the English context. So just to name a couple, I learned, and Melissa, I think we'll put a couple of these in the chat. I learned that les rouages are inner workings, and quack is a blunder or a false note. And Linda, you talked about your côté pipelette, your chatty or bavard side. So just in talking about those things in the book, I learned this great new vocabulary. So along those lines, can you offer up a couple of recent vocab epiphanies, negative or positive? Linda, we'll start with you.
Mine are both. So in the sense that I've learned something, it's great. They're tinged with other things. My first, I suppose, would be the word, and they're all they're almost always in the context of memory and past experience. So my first word, I guess, would be baratiner. And this was hundreds of years ago when I no longer lived in France, but I was visiting. And I found myself in a small post office, and I actually don't remember, but it was in the South somewhere. And behind the postal clerk, I was with a friend, and behind the postal clerk, there was no one else there, thank heavens, but there was a clock on the wall. And it was that it no longer exists. It just doesn't exist anymore. Yellow and blue marked PTT, and it was completely charming, and I had to have it. So I proceeded to discuss, and he said, no, 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 no. And people were getting uncomfortable, but he finally conceded, and I walked away with the clock. Flash forward many years, and the clock no longer worked, and then the clock was lost. And I had, in the meantime, used the word baratiner, I don't know how many times, thinking that I understood it. Well, I lost the clock, but I learned the word, and it wasn't the meaning that I had thought all those years. So it was a true learning lesson in every sense. The other word is tristouner. Now I'm saying it properly, I think, or as close to proper as I can get. The word that I said in my mind, because I didn't have conversations about this word, was tristouner. So I thought it was nose sadness somehow, and that helped me remember triste au nez. And especially it was augmented when my husband told me a story about the sadly departed Michael Jackson. And he's claimed that he had read that Michael Jackson kept a jar of noses because he'd had so much work done on his sad nose. And I swear, until I saw it in print, it's triste au nez. And it is slightly sad. It's a little sad, but it's not as sad as I made it. So those words are with me probably forever. Claire, how about you?
Thank you for those lovely anecdotes, Linda. Alors, I will start with not so recent an epiphany and a negative one. As you said, Linda, I took Arabic for some time actually, and I was in one of the first classes. We were going over greetings in Arabic, and I remember how enchanted I was by the kind of lengthy but very delicate, charming back and forth that can take place between two people when they greet each other in Arabic. Sabah al-khair, sabah al-noor, sabah al-ward, sabah al-jasmin. May your morning be filled with good health, with light, with the scent of roses, with the scent of jasmine, and etc. It can be even longer. And it usually ends with Assalamu alaikum, and may peace be with you. And as we were made to repeat Assalamu alaikum, I all of a sudden was able to bridge the Arabic word with the French word salam alek. And this really took me aback because salam alek, faire des salam alek en français, actually means kind of baratiner, Linda. It's interesting, but it's more than baratiner. It's manipulate actually the other in order to obtain something that you want from that person. And so I was shocked how different this was from the expression in Arabic. And to this day, I don't think I've used salam alek any longer. Not that I used it much before, but it's definitely out of my repertoire aujourd'hui.
Well, that's great. And I see, Claire, excuse me, I see that Melissa has put these vocabulary words in the chat for the audience. And then I think you have, Claire, one more word that you want to share with us. Is that right?
Yes, just a very recent epiphany. I learned this word from Sylvain Tesson. Sylvain Tesson is an illustrious French writer. He was interviewed on the set of La Grande Librairie. And he confessed that he too learned this word fairly recently. So I thought, first of all, it was great to just say, when you're a very gifted writer to say that you're still learning words, which of course is completely part of what we all go through as native speakers. And he shared the word, it's coruscant. And I loved the image he used because he had an idea about the word that's completely different from what it actually means. He said, coruscant made me think of the burn from a drop of hot sauce in the eye. You know, he thought about something meaning very acidic, bitter. And actually it means éclatant, brillant, glittering, sparkling. So the contrast was, I love the image he used to talk about his mishap with French vocabulary as well. And by the way, I checked, coruscant is un vrai ami, because coruscant exists in English and means the exact same thing. So this is proof that we can certainly rely on quite a number of vrais amis, you know,
Okay.
in French.
Claire, so if I'm understanding, coruscant is also an English word.
Absolutely.
Okay. How many of us in the audience knew that? Raise your hand. Not me. So in the process of learning French, we're also learning English, as Claire points out, through the cognates, which are, you know, words that are essentially the same in English and or French. And I told Linda and Claire a story the other day where I was in a French class and somebody wanted to say the concept of persuade, and the professor said, well, why don't you say persuader, which of course is a cognate, right? And I think sometimes we overlook the cognate. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Claire. And Melissa's going to put up in the chat, if any of you are interested, the link to a brilliant presentation that was done just a couple of months ago by Anthony Lacoudre en français, and his entire topic was the influence of the French language on English. And it's a fascinating, wonderful, wonderful video if you have a chance to look at that. It's on our YouTube channel. Okay, so let's move to our next question. And ladies, we're doing really, really well on time. So I congratulate you on that, since we have so much material to cover. Okay, Claire, this one's for you, starting off with. I really enjoyed your discussion of the French soundscape and found it fascinating, particularly because it's a point of view from the perspective of a native French speaker. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about what you meant by a soundscape?
Well, a soundscape, I'd say a visual image for sound, you know, and when I thought about it, and I thought about it quite hard actually, I eventually visualized a smooth road winding among hills, and I also could hear the pitter-patter of the rain gently tapping the earth. So I can explain to you why this idea came to mind. I'll start with the smooth road. As all of you know, of course, English and French have very different rhythms. And I'm not talking about sounds, phonemes, vowel sounds in particular. I'm talking about rhythmic patterns. To me, English is a very mountainous language, you know. It's as if we were going up and down the slopes of words. Why? Because English words comprise at least one syllable that is stressed, sometimes two when the words are long. And that is not the case with French. We do have very few stressed syllables, but they're not inside words. Those stressed syllables, that's when it's becoming a bit technical, but nothing too complicated. Those stressed syllables are the very last ones of French rhythmic groups. And a French rhythmic group is one chunk of language that that has meaning on its own. So if let me give you a concrete example. If I say, for instance, je travaille aux Nations Unies, je travaille aux Nations Unies, I work at the UN, je travaille aux Nations Unies, you see this smooth road. Et j'aime mon travail. Two phrases, je travaille aux Nations Unies et j'aime mon travail. The last syllable of je travaille aux Nations Unies carries slightly more weight, and the last syllable of j'aime mon travail also. Hence the hills in my the image I had about the French soundscape. Is that clear for everybody? Yeah. Okay. Now I can talk about the pitter-patter of rain, perhaps. This sound takes place within those groups. Why? Because sounds get smooshed together, and by getting smooshed together, they create other sounds. And if we go back to this exact same example, je travaille aux Nations Unies, je travaille aux Nations Unies. If I say this a bit quicker, or perhaps just, je travaille aux Nations Unies. Je travaille aux Nations Unies. And it's these je ne peux pas, etc. That becomes to me the kind of.
No, I think, Claire, I hope we haven't lost your audio, but Claire, can you say something?
Yes, I can.
Okay, for a moment, I lost your audio. It was probably okay, good. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to raise an alarm bell where there wasn't one. I just want to reinforce to the audience that what Claire has said right now is just so important as an English speaker for us to recognize the patterns of stressing and the packaging of words in spoken French is just really important if we want to quote unquote sound French. And I just think it's marvelously important, and I encourage you all to read that whole chapter very carefully. Yes, let's move on to our next question. So this is back to Linda now. You have a chapter entitled Louder Than Words, Maison Douceur. It finishes with a very elegant sentence of yours, Linda. It practically sounds like poetry, and this is just in the middle of the book, where you say, I'm reminded that a multitude of selves can be accessed and even accessorized in the spaces between words. That's lovely. Now, what did you mean by that?
Thank you very much. Sometimes these sentences appear and then you have to really scratch your head and say, what exactly did I mean? I think for me, French is such a time travel thing. It's an engagement that takes me back to when, for instance, when we talk about learning a certain word, for me, I can, if with luck, and this is what helps make some of the language stick, certainly the vocabulary, if I can remember when I learned it, what I was doing, what I was feeling. So I think what I meant was the access to a past that I won't have again. There was a Linda who lived in France. There was a Linda who raised her children for the most part there, not for the most part, but certainly for their young lives. There was a Linda who was in New York with a lunch group. We were speaking French and engaging in that way. And it was very intense, though on a different level. I wasn't living in France anymore. So I keep getting further and further away in one sense, but I'm coming closer to the language, which I can take with me. Then here I had a book group for many years at Françaises. And it was, again, it was a book a month, which is quite a pace to keep up. And that was a different engagement too. Again, moving further and further away to what was really central at one time. So I guess that's really the best I can do. It captures the language captures for me the time that I spent there and the sort of importance to keep up that connection. If that makes any sense, does it?
Oh yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think many of us in the audience have those moments where we where we somehow reconnect or we can reconnect with the language at the level that we maybe had 30, 40 years ago. And it just comes back to us if the circumstances are right, which is exactly what you said. And I think the encouraging part about that, Linda, when I heard you explain this a couple of days ago, was that it encourages us because now we know that what we learned or experienced earlier in the language is still there in our brains. We just have to tap into it. It's not like we've lost it. We just have to tap into it. And I thought that was great. So thank you very much for that explanation. Now we'll go to Linda first on this one. You have a chapter entitled One Piece at a Time à la Tâche, and it describes two very different learning approaches or styles. How do you think the two converge or complement each other? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you think and how that worked for you?
That's a very crowded question, and I'll try to answer it as best I can. It's sort of, that chapter comes at a breaking point structurally in the book where Claire and I kind of take a step back and say, accidentally and also by design, what's going on here? I am a very different sort of learner. Claire is, she will talk about it more, but she upholds, and this is what really moves her to learn. She is task-based. Me, as an autonomous learner, I was on a walk with my husband, came up with this, what I thought was original term, piecemeal learning, which is a little of this, a little of that, some from here, some from there. And I'm on my own with that, but it keeps me going because it ignites my love for the language. I said last night to my husband, how can I ever make this clear? He said, go back to MIT and what you learned about, because I did not invent this term. And he said, and think of that thing we see television ads for. It's a Roomba. It's a vacuum cleaner that I don't have one, but it moves around the room. And when it hits an obstacle, it changes position, goes to another thing, and it goes around and it cleans the whole room. But it does this in a very non-systematic way. So that's sort of how I learn. Claire's method is very different, and I honor it with all my heart and soul. It's just not my way. So Claire, talk about task-based. Oh, also, I want to just throw in, you can switch. You don't have to be married to either of those ways to learn. And prepping for speaking about this book, which has been 100 years in the making, you can bet I did some task-based learning. I actually have, it's a living language calendar, and these are just simple sentences, one per day, and they're pretty great. And I tracked down the gentleman who created these, and he's been so lovely to kind of tutor me and get me back in the swing. Before speaking to you all, I just had to reanimate because it's been a very quiet 2 years, and I'm lucky to be here. But it's been quiet on the French front. Therefore, Claire, I hand it to you now.
Merci, Linda. Task-based methodology is based on the precept that languages are best learned when needed. I think we will agree that need is probably the most potent, the most powerful motivator. When we, I'm sorry, j'ai un chat dans la gorge. Voilà, le chat a disparu. When we want to, when we have a goal and when we want to accomplish something, often we need to learn a few things in order to be able to accomplish this goal. And so that's that applies to language learning, but to any kinds of goals we might want to achieve in life. So in our classes, we assign learners with a task, a language task that can be either spoken or written. And being able to accomplish this task will require a certain amount of words and a certain amount of language structures, because the idea, of course, is to accomplish the task as efficiently and as accurately as possible. And of course, we teachers and course designers think about tasks that will that are specific enough so that we can target very specific linguistic content, but not only linguistic, pragmatic, social linguistic content to be acquired in order to be able to realize the task. And so the class starts with the announcement of the task, and then with an overview of the tools needed to be learned in order to accomplish the task. And we'll spend a certain amount of time preparing for the task, and when learners are ready, they then can accomplish the task. And this job will actually often serve as assessment as well. You know, are they able to do the job we want them to be able to do in French, and well enough, and precisely enough, and efficiently enough.
Well, that's great, Claire. Thank you very much. I think we're running just a little bit behind time now, so we might want to just push through these last couple of questions a little more quickly. My takeaway from your section that Claire, you just talked about, and Linda, it's that for our adult learners that are coming back to the language, you know, Linda was pretty clear. Whatever works for you, if it's interactive task-based language, if you want to try to get into immersion, if you want to, you know, really concentrate on grammar, if you want to do piecemeal, if you want to use the internet as your guide and some of the tools on there, those are all part of your toolkit, right, Linda? You can use them all, and they'll take you where you want to go. Okay.
100%. And I would also add that there is an abundance of riches out there. I mean, the French have exported their culture in a way that is astonishing, and I will go from one to another, and the radio too is a different exercise completely, and it's lovely. Some things are just real treasures.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you there. And we have just a couple more questions that we'll try to get through before we open up to questions and answers from the audience. We are interested also in how your chapter on book basics came together, and what your current livre de chevet, the ones on your nightstand are. I do want to say here that I was so happy to see that you recommended the female author, Fred Vargas. And then, so take it away, Linda. What are one or two titles on your livre de chevet?
It's an old copy of Dictée pour les nuls. And it's a little, right, honestly, it's a paragraph and a wild explanation of, you get a touch of grammar, you get all kinds of things. It's directed to students who flip out over French dictée, which takes you Bernard Pivot and all of that. It's delightful, and can be bedtime reading. I also am have finished rereading Bonjour Tristesse, sort of in honor of our book group, because that was one of our first and favorite books.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Les dictées pour les nuls, c'est ça? Okay, bravo.
And La Dictée, I think. I'm not sure. But the foreword is beautiful, and it's by Anna Gavalda, and she has a delightful sense of humor and puts everything in great perspective.
Oh, I've got to get that. Claire, how about you? Do you have anything on your table de chevet? Maybe give us one title.
I do, yes. Actually, I read those two books 3 times in 2 years, so they qualify for being livre de chevet. Marie Darrieussecq, Être ici est une splendeur. Just the title in itself is a wonderful invitation to reading the book. Être ici est une splendeur. Et Idis by Robert Banater. Both happen to be biographies, but actually they read like novels, because both are about the very singular and exceptional fate of 2 extraordinary women. Idis being Robert Badinter's grandmother, and Marie Darrieussecq pays homage to Paula Modersohn-Becker. Voilà.
Thank you so much for those recommendations. I want to add too that for those of you who enjoy learning French through literature, that on afusa.org we have 17 top recommendations from our book club committee. So Melissa oh, actually, you'll just need to go to AFUSA and look for the One Book, One Federation page. We have, oh, there it is. Melissa's got it in the chat. She's always ahead of me. Thank you, Melissa. And then also, Alliance Française members have access to thousands and thousands of books on, or a free resource for Alliance Française members called Culture. So you might want to look into that as well for your books. Moving on now to a different media. We're going to be talking about, or medium, we're going to be talking about your chapter on film, where you remind us of the benefits of watching films in English, whether it's on TV5 Monde, who's a big partner of ours, in the theater, or even catching extracts on YouTube. Sometimes, you know, let's admit it, the audience probably agrees with me, watching films in French can be frustrating or even depressing. Even with the subtitles on. So can you remind us about the important benefits of going through that torture?
Sure. And it can be torturous, and especially in a house with very poor acoustics. So we here are very, stop the film, I need to rewind the film. We still do that. And Claire did it with us. It was part of our exercise for writing the book and how we came together on these films, but we continue to do it to this day. If I missed a piece of dialogue or there's a word that I really want to capture, we do it, we rewind. And also, I can't always hear, so I'm moving. There's a lot of motion during these films. And we have the luxury of having them right in our house. I want to say for anybody who's a Catherine Frot, F-R-O-T fan, there was a lovely documentary just that ran pretty recently on TV5 Monde, and there's just ample material there to learn and to enjoy.
Okay, great. And I love that, you know, you do a great job in the book of reminding us too that when we watch TV shows or films, we get amazing cultural insights into savoir-faire, savoir-être, class systems, the use of tu and vous, the variations of registre, and also new vocabulary and context. So thank you so much for reminding us in the book of you know, all of the benefits, and also giving us many, many good film recommendations, as I mentioned earlier. We'll move on to a really big question for starting off with Linda. Your definition of mastery and your own goals in French have evolved over the years, Linda. Can you talk about the drive for perfection? Is it really a matter of speaking sans un couac, without a blunder, or is it okay, and Claire will want to chime in on this last part as well, is it okay for us to retain a bit of our native accent and to make mistakes?
What a loaded question. Thank you for cornering me on that one. You know, you'd think that's my quest in the book, is to overcome this need for perfection. I haven't overcome it. I fight with this all the time. It hangs me up. I might get completely stuck on a point of grammar. And meanwhile, the conversation has gone on without me because I'm trying to figure out, oh, wait, what tense was that? And, or did I use the wrong tense, etc. It's a struggle, and communication is a form of I don't want to use the word mastery because I'm not there. I struggle with perfection. It eludes me, obviously, but you know what? It's not just French. So this is a little bit of a problem I have in a lot of areas, and French just highlights it. But it's also what draws me in. So for me, it's in very exacting language. A native French speaker may think otherwise, but for me, oh boy, you know, I got to put on my good clothes to speak this language, sort of. But we talk about that and go back and forth in the book. Claire has ideas of her own on this.
Yeah, I think it's a common theme throughout the book. Go ahead, Claire. I really like, Claire, by the way, I want to tell you, I really appreciated the discussion that you had in the book about, you know, you question us Americans and you question, well, why are we so intent on completely losing our accents? Because accents can be charming, right? I mean, you pointed that out in the book.
Yes, absolutely. But I'd like to answer your question, Linda, by perhaps talking about very rapidly I know we're short on time, about the structure of the book, because I think it's pointing to the answer to your question. As Linda said, it took us a while to figure out what this book would be about. And it's only when our conversations led to the notion of fluency, and what it means to be a fluent speaker and a fluent writer, that we had a clear idea of the shape of the book. Because, and Linda's hang up with grammar really helped us steer the book in a different direction. We decided that it was crucial to identify and then debunk stereotypes that many learners have about what it is, what it means to be a fluent speaker. And one of those stereotypes is about mastery of grammar. We consider, of course, mastery of grammar is an admirable achievement. There's no question about this. However, is this what will necessarily make you a fluent, coherent, charismatic speaker? No, it's certainly going to help, but it's not the most important. And so the first section of the book, I think, comprises about 5-6 chapters, and we go from what we consider the least important to this notion of achieving flow to what we consider the most important. And then in the second section, we provide learning tips, based on Linda's approach and the task-based methodology. So, I thought it was important to say that as well today.
Yeah, this is a very heavy subject. I really enjoyed the way that you delved into the book. At one point you said, sounding French alone doesn't mean you have total mastery or that you have good communication. Having perfect grammar, like you just said, doesn't mean that you have perfect communication. And if you don't know if you don't know the cultural context of the delivery of what you're talking about, then you also don't have effective communication skills. So all of those things taken into consideration. Great discussions in the book on that. Can I ask you to talk just a teeny bit about the contrast of Monsieur Auzout's speech in the L'Élégance du Hérisson, where he had, and correct me if I'm wrong, his French was perfect and very eloquent, but it was poorly delivered. And then you contrasted that with Bradley Cooper's delivery, which is very smooth and very fluent, but which contains grammar errors. And there was a discussion in there. Well, which one is better? I mean, I know, in my opinion, which one is better. But do you want to comment a little bit on that,
Claire?
Well, I think just to give you a bit of a context, Mr. Auzout is the main character in L'Élégance du Hérisson, a novel that we cherished in the book group. And Mr. Auzout, I met Mr. Auzout on the paper first, and I'd love to go on a date with Mr. Auzout. It's true. He's such an eloquent, but not only eloquent speaker. He's a wonderful gentleman. He's funny. He's empathetic. He's subtle, he's charismatic, he knows how to make you feel comfortable. Voilà, Mr. Auzout. And then I discovered Mr. Auzout on the screen, and I was shocked because poor Mr. Auzout was crippled with very labored pronunciation, and there's no way I could have imagined him speaking French the way he does in the film. And I'm not talking about the words, I'm talking about the accent. And that's when, we say that, unfortunately, extraordinary grammar, extraordinary vocabulary, and labored pronunciation equals bad news because we have a hard time understanding what he's saying. Voilà. And Linda responded to me by, that's when you mentioned Bradley Cooper, right, Linda?
Mm-hmm. And there's also such apparent joy when you find Bradley Cooper a video speaking French. It's clear that he's having the best time, and you want to join him in that. It's a very inviting approach to the language, I think. And
Oh,
he feels relaxed, it seems to me, and how I mean, it's fun to watch.
well, and then the cool thing about Bradley Cooper is we enjoy watching him, and it's clear that he enjoys what he's doing, and he's a very effective communicator. But I'll remind the audience, he does make frequent grammar and even sometimes sentence structure mistakes. But because he's so comfortable and his accent is so good, we forgive him. And after all, he's communicating what he wants to get across, and it doesn't bother him that he makes mistakes. Okay, all right. We have one last question. Let's see, maybe you want to tackle it pretty quick, so at least have 3 or 4 minutes for questions. Linda and Claire, how much of the last chapter did you map out? Did your final destination of the book surprise you? Linda?
Yes, it surprised me. It was trying to figure out how my mind works by observing it sort of at a distance. I'm wrapped up in my own mind, and I can't analyze it because I'm in it. I'm trapped in it and freed by it, et cetera, et cetera. But I do tend in many matters, and it's not always easy to follow, obviously, but I go from point to point to point, and somehow if I confuse them, I'm happy and satisfied. And that's what came together in that final chapter for my business. And then I had also found a singer, did not know, Axel, excuse me for fussing here. Yeah, Axel Red, I don't know. She's a Belgian singer, but I came across her lyrics and they seem to work perfectly. I don't know who composed the song, but I see some of the same struggles and some of the same issues that we've been discussing here for the past hour. So it spoke to me, and for me, it was a nice way to conclude. So Claire had her own story about the way she concluded her section.
Well, yes, and I have to say it's not quite, the surprise didn't come at the end of the book for me, but it came when I wrote the chapter book basics, because I wrote this chapter on my own. It's the only chapter when the dialogue idea isn't taking place. And here I was with enough space, enough room to really experience what it was to be a writer. Because, you know, when you have to think about the questions to ask or the answers to give Linda, make sure we're on the right path to go where we want to be landing at the end, it's quite, yeah, there are constraints about writing. But in this chapter, I was on my own for some time. And that's when I was able to hear my own literary voice in English. And that was an extraordinary experience for me, extraordinary. And that's what I talk about at the end of the book, you know, being able to hear the music I was making in English motivated me enormously to keep at it. And God knows how many hours I spent writing those 8 pages in English. It's kind of crazy. But the surprise for me was that motivation can take so many different shapes. You know, it was the music I was making. I want to keep writing just because of that moment. Voilà.
Well, great. Well, this is your first book, so we look forward to your next book coming out soon, Claire. Congratulations on a great first book. Hey, Melissa, we're almost out of time, but do we have any questions that you want to bring up from the chat?
We do. We have one question for Linda asking, what was that? It was either a website or it was a daily calendar with new sentences every day. Could you give us the name of that again?
Yes, and I don't know, I'm taking a liberty here, but let's see here. Can you see? Is that clear on the screen? So Living Language Calendar. And it took a little bit of sleuthing, but I found the author of these, and they're just delightful. And as you can see, that I haven't opened it. Oh dear, since I'm behind. But here's Saturday. So you get a daily dose, and it's just a little spoonful. And they vary. I've been doing this for several years, and I did some, again, you know, the web, the web, right? We all are prone to it, and I rely on it a lot. But I found the author of these who has done these consistently, I believe. At any rate, he's done them. He did this one that I have on my desk, and he did some quick tutoring for me, Sevulitsky. So it's delightful, and I think Random House, I believe. It's out there, and I hope 2023 will be as effective as 2022.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
I think that's a great idea, because it just kind of, if there's going to be no other French in your day, then at least you have that one little bit.
Right.
For a while, I tried to watch RFI, Français Facile, the news in Français Facile every day, and that's something that we also recommend as well. And to all of our Alliance Française members, your teachers will have scads of resources on the internet that they've curated and that they recommend to our students for keeping up their French, along with their weekly class. So, Melissa, any other questions in the chat? Okay, great. Well, we are pretty much out of time.
Linda, if I may, I would like to do something. I have here, I'm collecting artichokes, actually. And I simply would like to show this very, very delicate watercolor painting that was given to me by a dear friend who may be in the audience today. And I have another one. Christina did the watercolor, and Huguette, very different, did this one. This is oil painting, very different, but also quite lovely. Voilà. And my sister Anne, who's an artiste peintre, also painted an artichoke. I don't have it with me, but I wanted to honor her today as well.
Oh, thank you for sharing that beautiful art. And I'll since I'm a perfectionist, will answer Anne Peterson. Linda lived in southern France, and Claire grew up in Alsace. And with that, we'll close out, and thank you all for joining us on a Saturday, and we hope to see you at our next national event on afusa.org. Merci to Claire and to Linda and to Melissa. Au revoir tout le monde.
Au revoir. Merci beaucoup.
Au revoir.